Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Imagine this. It's October 14th, 1947. High above the sun-scorched Mojave Desert, a massive B-29 Superfortress bomber lumbers through the thin, crisp air. Cradled in its belly isn't a bomb, but a strange, bright orange aircraft shaped like a bullet. Inside its cramped cockpit sits a 24-year-old Air Force captain, trying to ignore the searing pain from two freshly broken ribs. In moments, he will be dropped into the sky to challenge a force of nature, a barrier many of the world's top engineers and pilots believed was absolute and deadly, the very speed of sound. This is the story of that day, of the pilot with what came to be known as the right stuff, and of the remarkable machine that together broke the sonic wall and propelled humanity headlong into a new age. In the years immediately following World War II, aviation was advancing at a breathtaking pace. Propeller-driven planes, the heroes of the war, were quickly giving way to the nascent power of the jet engine. Planes were flying higher and faster than ever before. But as they pushed the envelope, they ran into an invisible and seemingly impenetrable wall. They called it the sound barrier. As an aircraft approaches the speed of sound, which is about 767 miles per hour at sea level, but gets slower at higher, colder altitudes, the air molecules in front of it can no longer get out of the way smoothly. They begin to compress, forming powerful shock waves that flow over the wings and control surfaces. For pilots of the 1940s, the experience was terrifying. Their aircraft would begin to buffet violently, shaking so hard it felt like it would tear itself apart. Control surfaces would become useless, frozen by the aerodynamic forces. Many planes went into uncontrollable dives, their pilots helpless as they plunged toward the ground. They spoke of hitting a brick wall in the sky, a mysterious, malevolent force that seemed intent on destroying their machines. The term sound barrier had been coined back in the 1930s, and by the 1940s, it had taken on a mythical, almost supernatural quality. Erroneous news reports, often sensationalized, led the public to envision a literal, physical wall in the atmosphere that an aircraft would have to physically break through. This fear wasn't entirely paranoia. During the war, pilots in high-speed dives with powerful aircraft like the P-38 Lightning and P-47 Thunderbolt reported their controls locking up and their aircraft being overtaken by these mysterious forces. The most chilling confirmation of these fears came in September 1946. British test pilot Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., son of the famous aircraft designer, was attempting to break the sound barrier in his experimental DH-108, a beautiful but unforgiving tailless jet. During a high-speed dive, the aircraft encountered catastrophic structural failure and disintegrated in midair. His death sent a shockwave through the aviation community. It crippled the British supersonic program and solidified the belief for many that the sound barrier was an unconquerable demon. Leading engineers were deeply skeptical that any pilot or aircraft could safely cross this threshold and survive. The question wasn't just if it could be done, but if it should even be attempted. Despite the pervasive fear and skepticism, a small group of forward-thinking engineers and military leaders in the United States believed the sound barrier wasn't a wall, but a set of complex aerodynamic problems that could be solved with the right machine. In 1944, a visionary joint project was launched by the U.S. Army Air Forces and the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, the direct predecessor to NASA. Their goal was audacious: to design and build a dedicated supersonic research aircraft. On March 16, 1945, the contract was awarded to Bell Aircraft Corporation. The result was the X-1 for Experimental Supersonic, later designated simply as the X-1. Its design was a masterclass in functional elegance. The engineers, led by Bell's Robert Woods and Benson Hamlin, looked for an object that was already known to be stable at supersonic speeds. They found their inspiration in the .50 caliber machine gun bullet. The X-1 was literally shaped like a bullet with wings. This sleek aerodynamic fuselage was designed to slice through the transonic air with minimal resistance. The wings were a critical piece of the puzzle. They were incredibly thin, only 10% as thick as they were wide, and straight, unlike the swept wing designs that would later become common for supersonic flight. This design was specifically chosen to minimize the creation of drag-inducing shock waves and provide maximum stability during the crucial moments of passing through Mach 1 in level flight. Powering this bullet with wings was not a conventional air-breathing jet engine. Jet engines of the era were not powerful enough, and their performance was unpredictable in the transonic range. Instead, the X-1 was fitted with a Reaction Motors XLR-11 rocket engine. This engine was a marvel. It burned a mixture of liquid oxygen, or LOX, and a fuel of diluted ethyl alcohol and water. It consisted of 4 individual rocket chambers, each capable of producing 500 pounds of thrust. The pilot could ignite these chambers one by one, allowing for precise and incremental control over the aircraft's powerful acceleration, building up to a total of 6,000 pounds of thrust. The entire airframe was a testament to the unknown forces they were preparing to face. It was stressed to withstand an incredible 18 gigaseconds, or 18 times the force of gravity, far beyond what any pilot could endure, but a necessary precaution against the violent forces they anticipated at the barrier. However, the single most critical innovation of the Bell X-1, the feature that truly unlocked supersonic flight, was its all-moving horizontal stabilizer. This is also known as a stabilator, or a, quote, flying tail. Here's why it was so important. As an aircraft nears Mach 1, shock waves form and move across the wings and tail. On a conventional tail, these shock waves could render the small, hinged elevators useless, completely robbing the pilot of pitch control. This was exactly the control lock that had led to so many fatal dives. The X-1's entire horizontal tailplane was a single, movable surface. The pilot could adjust its angle of attack, allowing him to maintain pitch control and fly right through the region of shockwave formation. This groundbreaking concept was the direct solution to the problem that had killed Geoffrey de Havilland, and it would become a standard design feature on virtually all subsequent supersonic aircraft. There was one last problem to solve. The XLR-11 rocket engine was immensely powerful, but also incredibly thirsty. It only carried enough fuel for about 2.5 minutes of powered flight. Taking off from a runway would burn most of that fuel just getting to altitude. So, a unique launch method was devised. The X-1 would be carried aloft, nestled in the modified bomb bay of a Boeing B-29 Superfortress. At a high altitude, the B-29 would release it, and only then would the pilot ignite the rocket engine, saving every drop of precious fuel for the high-speed portion of the flight. The revolutionary machine was ready, but who would dare to fly it into what the test pilots at Muroc dryly called the unknown? Initially, the flight testing was handled by Bell's own civilian pilot, Chalmers Slick Goodlin. He made 20 flights, pushing the X-1 ever closer to the barrier. But when it came time for the final push, Goodlin demanded a hefty bonus of $150,000, equivalent to over $2 million today, to be the one to break the sound barrier. The Air Force, which had taken over the program, balked at the price. They decided the risk should be taken and the glory earned by one of their own military pilots. The choice fell upon Captain Charles E. Chuck Yeager. Born in 1923 in the humble backwoods of West Virginia, Yeager was the furthest thing from an ivory tower engineer. He had enlisted in the Army Air Forces as a mechanic in 1941, but his exceptional eyesight and flying aptitude got him into flight training. During World War II, he became a decorated fighter ace. He was shot down over German-occupied France, evaded capture with the help of the French resistance, and made a daring escape over the Pyrenees into Spain. He returned to combat and even scored an ace in a day by downing 5 enemy aircraft on a single mission. Yeager possessed a rare combination of talents. He had a natural, intuitive understanding of machinery an almost supernatural ability to feel what an aircraft was doing and diagnose problems in mid-air. He wasn't an engineer with a college degree, but he could translate his pilot's seat experience into invaluable data for the engineers on the ground. More importantly, he was known for his unshakable calm, his cool head under extreme pressure, and a fearless, almost reckless love of a challenge. Colonel Albert Boyd, the stern chief of the Flight Test Division, handpicked Yeager for the assignment, recognizing in him the unique combination of raw skill and sheer nerve required for the job. Yeager's pay for this monumental flight? His standard captain's salary of $283 a month. Following a tradition he kept with all his aircraft, Yeager christened the orange X-1 with the name Glamorous Glennis, a tribute to his wife. This personal touch on the side of the futuristic rocket plane was a poignant reminder of the human being inside, about to risk everything on the cutting edge of technology. As Yeager himself would later say with his characteristic understatement, "It didn't make any difference to me whether I thought the airplane would go faster than sound. I was assigned as a test pilot on it, and it was my duty to fly it." The flight was scheduled for October 14th. But just 2 days before, on a Sunday evening, disaster nearly struck. The Muroc test pilots and their families often gathered at Pancho's Fly-In, a legendary bar and restaurant run by the equally legendary aviator Florence Pancho Barnes. After dinner, Yeager and Glennis went for a horseback ride in the desert. As darkness fell, they decided to race back to the corral. In the pitch black, Yeager didn't see that a gate had been closed. He and his horse collided with it at a gallop. He was thrown violently, breaking 2 ribs on his right side. He knew immediately what this meant. A trip to the base doctor would get him grounded instantly. He would lose the flight of a lifetime. Determined not to let that happen, Yeager drove to the nearby town of Rosamond and found a civilian veterinarian who, understanding the situation, taped up his ribs and didn't file a report. But the physical injury presented a critical mechanical problem. To seal the X-1 for flight, the pilot had to pull down on a heavy, awkward lever from the inside to lock the hatch. This required a strong pull with the right arm, an action Yeager knew was impossible with his broken ribs. In a moment that has become an iconic part of aviation lore, Yeager confided in his friend and the project's brilliant lead engineer, Captain Jack Ridley. Ridley wasn't just an engineer. He was an accomplished pilot himself and understood the stakes completely. He thought for a moment, then went to a hangar. He returned not with some complex piece of equipment, but with a solution of beautiful simplicity, about 10 inches of a broom handle. The idea was that Yeager could use the sawn-off handle with his good left hand to give him the extra leverage he needed to reach over and force the hatch lever closed. They practiced the maneuver on the ground, in secret. It worked. The mission was back on, saved by a piece of a broom. The morning of October 14, 1947, dawned clear and bright over Muroc Army Airfield, now known as Edwards Air Force Base. At 10 a.m., the B-29 mothership, named Fertile Myrtle and piloted by Major Bob Cardenas, took off with the Glamorous Glennis tucked snugly into its bomb bay. As they climbed toward the drop altitude, Yeager, fighting through considerable pain from his ribs, made the difficult transfer from the bomber's pressurized cabin into the unpressurized, ice-cold cockpit of the X-1. Once inside, he reached for his secret tool. Using the piece of broom handle, he managed to lock the heavy hatch. He was sealed in. At 20,000 feet, the B-29 went into a shallow dive to gain speed for the drop. In the cockpit of the X-1, Yeager braced himself. Then came the countdown from the B-29 pilot, and with what Yeager described as a, quote, mighty crack from the bomb shackle release, the Glamorous Glennis dropped into the vastness of the sky. The initial moments were tense. The drop was slower than planned, and the little rocket plane immediately went into a stall. But Yeager, ever the consummate pilot, quickly recovered control. He then began the sequence, firing all 4 chambers of the XLR-11 rocket engine in rapid succession. The X-1 surged forward with incredible force, climbing steeply into the stratosphere. "We were really hauling," Yeager would later recall. As he neared 42,000 feet, he leveled off and prepared for the final push into history. He knew what to expect, or so he thought. On his 8th powered flight, just 4 days earlier, he had reached Mach 0.997, agonizingly close, and experienced the dreaded loss of elevator effectiveness. It was a heart-stopping moment that was saved only by Jack Ridley's earlier insight to use the adjustable stabilizer for control. This time, as he pushed the nose down slightly and accelerated through Mach 0.965, the intense buffeting began right on schedule. The plane shook and rattled. But then, something remarkable happened. Instead of the violent shaking getting worse as he went faster, the ride suddenly became smooth as glass. "I noticed the faster I got, the smoother the ride," Yeager wrote in his autobiography. He later described the odd sensation as poking through jello. He looked down at his instruments. The needle on the Machmeter, which measures speed relative to the speed of sound, had been fluctuating wildly. Now, it jumped clear off the scale, past Mach 1. He had done it. He was flying faster than the speed of sound. At that moment, at an altitude of 43,000 feet, Chuck Yeager had reached a speed of Mach 1.06, approximately 700 miles per hour in the thin, cold air. On the ground below, the project team heard it, a distant, thunderous double boom, the sonic signature of the shock waves trailing the aircraft. It was the first man-made sonic boom to ever echo across the desert. The transition itself, the moment of breaking the barrier, was, as Yeager famously described it, remarkably uneventful. There was no brick wall. There was no demon in the sky. There was just smooth, quiet flight. For 18 seconds, Chuck Yeager flew in the supersonic realm. He then shut down the rocket engine and, now in a 30-ton glider, executed a series of turns and maneuvers to gather more data before gliding the glamorous Glennis to a perfect, dusty landing on the dry lakebed of Muroc. The entire flight, from release to landing, had lasted just 14 minutes. The world's first supersonic flight was classified top secret. The news was not officially announced to the public for nearly 8 months, until June 1948. But for the small, tight-knit team at Muroc, the celebration began that afternoon. With a pitcher of martinis at Yeager's house, the men who had dared to challenge the impossible toasted their monumental achievement. The breaking of the sound barrier by Chuck Yeager and the Bell X-1 was a watershed moment in human history. It was far more than just a new speed record. It was the shattering of a profound psychological barrier. It was a stunning demonstration that with courage, ingenuity, and a willingness to face the unknown, humanity could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. As Yeager himself so aptly put it, the real barrier wasn't in the sky but in our knowledge and experience of supersonic flight. The data gathered during the 78 flights of the entire X-1 program, which eventually reached speeds as high as Mach 1.45 and altitudes of over 71,000 feet, was invaluable. It provided a treasure trove of information on transonic and supersonic aerodynamics, shockwave behavior, and control effectiveness. This knowledge was immediately applied to the design of the next generation of military aircraft, giving the United States a significant and decisive technological advantage in the early years of the Cold War. Aircraft like the North American F-100 Super Sabre, America's first operational supersonic fighter, were a direct result of the lessons learned from the Little Orange rocket plane. The X-1's success also opened the floodgates for the development of a whole lineage of experimental X-planes, pushing the boundaries of flight ever further. These included the legendary X-15 rocket plane, which would fly to the very edge of space, and even influenced the designs of commercial ventures like the Concorde supersonic transport, The engineers and designers who worked on the X-1 program went on to become giants in America's space program. Many of the principles of high-speed flight, rocket propulsion, and life support systems honed in the skies over Muroc were foundational to the design of the spacecraft for the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs. The X-1 program truly marked the beginning of the space age. And Chuck Yeager, the young captain from West Virginia, with ice water in his veins, became a living legend, an American icon. He continued his remarkable career as a test pilot, breaking more speed and altitude records. He commanded fighter squadrons in combat and later became the first commandant of the USAF Aerospace Research Pilot School, where he trained the first generation of American astronauts. Though he never flew in space himself, his courage, skill, and that famous flight in 1947 set the stage for all who would follow. Today, the glamorous Glennis hangs proudly in the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. It is a silent testament to the day sound was broken. It stands as a symbol of brilliant engineering, relentless innovation, and of the extraordinary individuals who, on a clear October day over the California desert, dared to fly faster than the speed of sound and, in doing so, changed the world forever.